welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to an anime story podcast.
Again!
It's the
Take
4th
two.
of November, and we're having take two for Trigun Part 1. So the audio we were having a problem with, of course we were, because audio. So a brief recap. We talked about how we're not going to talk about Trigun in its full extent right now because we have not really gotten far enough into the show, and being that it's an older show, it takes a little while to get going. We don't want to pass judgment. It was an older style of writing, older style of acting. We want to not really critique it too much until we finished it in part 2, which will be next Saturday. So we're going to talk about Trigun a little bit, and we're going to talk about some other stuff. Bad Strategies below me. Howlin 3D is over on the right. I'm the Big Bad Moon. We're your hosts. I think that was everything. This is the Dancing and Anime Podcast.
Oh yes, also Hallen was saying that the old art style, we've lost some of that in modern years, things. I would like to say that kind of like the introduction of 3D into video games, which initially killed all beautiful games.
Yeah, initially.
That's kind of a thing that happened in anime to some extent, is switching over to 3D because it's easier to do, because it's cheaper to animate, and has negatively affected the art style of a lot of anime. But I will say sometimes it is done well,
Sometimes
and
it's great.
affected. Actually, you know what's a really good example of merging the two? Is friggin' it's with the major with
Oh,
Major Kusanagi? Yeah.
yes.
Standalone complex?
yes,
Yeah.
Ghost in the Shell. It is Ghost in the Shell. The Tachikomas that have like 6 or 8 limbs are all 3D animated, whereas the characters are not. And it works really well because they only use it for the complex things that they're gonna have a bunch of, that they're like, we can't do this by hand, but. And I don't care what anyone says, the Tachikoma episodes are all great. They're all gold.
Honestly, the intro to that show freaking got me too, because I was just like, because it's all animated, like the whole intro is, and I was like, this is weird, but it's good. And then I watched it, and it wasn't like that, but it was still amazing.
You know, sure, you can look back on and just revel in how awful the 3D animation is. Do you remember?
What's that?
Do you remember? Oh gosh, what was it? Reboot.
I love Reboot.
Go watch it again. You'll be like, oh
I know,
my God,
I did.
This looks so bad.
I know, I already have.
Yeah,
No,
that's
that's
the same thing.
It's pretty
You
bad.
pulled that name out of somewhere.
Exactly.
Reboot.
Oh, dear. I was trying to
all
think
the
it's a
characters.
computer. Yeah. Oh man, that was great. That was a great show. I don't know. I haven't watched it in a long time.
I liked it as a kid, and I like
true.
it now-ish.
Yeah.
Like, it had a lot of good. I felt like it started going downhill.
I would probably enjoy tearing the story to pieces and Reboot these days. Maybe not. Maybe it's brilliant. I haven't seen it in ages, so I can't tell.
For its time, it was freaking amazing. Because
When I was a
like
kid, I loved
rendering that much, my dad was into 3D rendering in the early 90s, and
Yeah,
that would
seriously.
take like 30 some days just for like a half an hour of information to be read out, and if it didn't get rendered correctly, there was no way to save that progress. That was insane times.
Yeah. Blender!
Blender! Fight the man! Use Blender!
You haven't gotten to that part in Trigun yet, the love and peace.
No. But speaking of Trigun.
You lost me.
Speaking of Trigun. So, we were going to have a relatively short discussion about some different aspects of the first few episodes. I think that it's really slow to get going. In the first like 5 episodes, I don't think there has been any actual like. So the first like several episodes, it seems to be just like
Understandable
monster
progress.
of the week, one shot. No, like this is the beginning, this is the end. That's the episode. Nothing to do with anything else.
So this is something that Trigun does. Like, it's not until episode 8 or so that we see any development from the main characters, and it's roughly a similar place in the show where we actually see the episodes being connected in the timeline in a meaningful way, right?
Yeah.
Like, initially it's these events could happen in just about any order. But then we start to see like, oh, they just left this place and are going to this place and are traveling together now. And then this is happening, and they're like, we start to see some consistency and coherency in the overarching narrative and the story that chains them together. Because I feel like
He
episodes,
destroys almost every town he touches.
yeah,
It's
but
consistent.
yeah, the destruction of the towns though, I would say could happen in any order in the first few episodes. Like we don't have a sense of how his movements are tied together and how the
Well, the only sense that we get is Meryl and her companion. I can't think of the name. They are like when they first meet him, they're like, "Oh, who is this guy?" And then they're like, "No, he can't be this person." So that kind of ties the story in a way of moving
I would say
forward.
that is probably one of the that's probably one of the only common threads, because I did notice that is there's this recurring like she does not believe that he is the, what do they call him, the
Bash
Vash the Stampede.
Bash the Stampede. Yeah, she does not believe that this character that she's encountered is Vash the Stampede. That's fair, and that's been consistent over all the episodes I've seen. So maybe that's gonna change. Maybe that's seems to be what it's building into.
Meryl Strife and Millie Thompson.
Millie.
That's a good name. That's not a commonly used name. Millie. Solid.
Millie Thompson and Meryl Strife. These last names.
Yeah.
Meryl.
Meryl. Meryl.
Meryl.
Meryl. Hey, listen.
Oh,
Yeah,
no.
exactly. Exactly. Get it.
Okay, so I think this is a so the thing we're talking about is so Helen, you were saying the voice acting is kind of dated. It's not bad, but it's dated, and so I think a way that I would also say that I think that's true. I think it's dated in the same way that, for instance, acting styles in Hollywood become dated. People used to act in a different style back in the 50s and the 40s and the 60s, and like John Wayne. John Wayne, I would say, is a really good actor in a specific style by the modern, like, prevalent style in Hollywood. These days, he's an awful actor. But according to the style of writing, the style of acting back then, he was really great. The same thing, I mean, this is what people, William Shatner in Star Trek is another example of, this style. The way they talk in Star Trek, yeah. And some people don't like it. Some people aren't into it.
Thing on the wing of the plane.
It's life, Jim. Yeah, and it's kind of stagey,
But Patrick Stewart can never be aged. I'm sorry.
Yeah,
the way he delivers things, it's just
that's true.
Also, Patrick Stewart, with his like particular aesthetic. Am I echoing?
I'm not getting an echo from you. I don't know.
Patrick Stewart, with his particular aesthetic, and like he's just always looked like an old man to me.
Yeah.
There was no point in his life at which I was like, oh, he looks like a young fellow. Nope, he just always looked old.
Yep. No, he was born looking that same way in 600 BCE. So. But
yeah.
Yes. So I think this is a thing I don't want to get because I could, because I really didn't like some of the voice acting. Also, the voice casting choices for the American dub. The main guy.
Have you guys seen Tenchi Muyo?
I haven't. No.
Oh, the voice acting, very similar.
Oh,
You're
is
gonna
it?
go,
Yeah.
okay.
It's not my favorite thing, but
It
that's not.
doesn't flow.
I can't. I'm not gonna fault like Casablanca for being a little bit too robotic, right? Because that's people didn't write the type of dialogue like you can look at like the newest most modern kind of style of dialogue and writing for characters is this like you watch the superhero movies. Everybody's quick, everybody's quippy, everybody's sarcastic, everybody says everything's really fast and really snappy. That was different than it was 10 years ago, and that was different than it was in the 1950s. And it was different when they wrote Trigun. So I'm not saying that any one of those is better or worse necessarily, because I'm not really a big fan of the style that most people are going for in like the superhero movies and a lot of cop movies and stuff these days. I'm not really into it, but it's not.
But
bad,
I mean,
it's
that
just
can
not
be
into
said
it.
about everything, because like people who are into like 70s music and only 70s cannot like 80s or not, like not cannot, but people get stuck in a
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
rut.
No, and so this is so yeah. I 100% agree, and I think that's one of the reasons that I don't want to get too hard onto the voice acting for me personally, because it's a style that I think is weird. Also, I think the character that was cast as the main guy, the
Bash the Stampede.
it's an interesting voice choice. It was an interesting vocal choice. So that's fine though. That's what they wanted, and that's what they did. And
it's very young. Yeah. Like I was surprised at how young the voice was.
Oh yeah, no, I have at various points stopped or like been thinking like, wow, this character, the person who's playing this character, he's the person who I think you would typically find playing like a 15-year-old maybe.
So there's also speaking of ages, there's a thing that happens sometimes in anime where there's a male character and they see a sexy female character and they're like, oh my gosh, that female character is so sexy, and then they start like pursuing the female character, and then we get a flashback to the female character being like 8 years old and the male character looking identical, and every time it happens I'm like, what how old is the protagonist and how old is this person?
That's
Was he still mid-20s when she was 8?
Oh my. No, I don't actually recall that in this.
That's because you didn't watch them. You need to watch more episodes.
Then I'll get to that.
I don't remember the flashback part, but I know kind of what you're talking about.
It's in the power plant episode.
Yeah, that's the one I was thinking of. Okay.
I
might have been slightly distracted. I'll rewatch it.
Yeah, so as far as the animation, I think the animation's actually great. I think the animation's really good. I think it has a lot of good movement in it, even though maybe it's a little bit ridiculous in some of the movement. But the movement itself is really good.
The opening shot in the first episode of them just these like 6, maybe there's 6 of them, maybe there's not, dudes opening fire on a bar in the middle of the desert and just having everything get blown apart.
And, like the whole top came off.
Yeah, that was fun. Yeah. I enjoyed watching that. That was enjoyable.
I know. I was like, whoa, what?
The outro is pretty. If I recall, for the first few episodes, the outro is not bad. The outro is it's very simple. But it's like, oh, fair.
We also see a very, very Hellsing sort of style to some of the depictions of the main character.
Also, FYI, just so everybody knows, I didn't really like the style of Hellsing either.
I haven't watched Hellsing.
Let me rephrase that. I didn't like the style of the writing in Hellsing. It's a little too ridiculous at times.
So Hellsing does on an episode by episode basis. It it does the switching
Mm-hmm.
between ultra serious and like ultra silly. Well, actually, maybe it's yeah, no, it switches tonally between very serious and very silly. I think to the extent that I remember Trigun doing, but I
Mm-hmm.
think that Trigun. Maybe I'm wrong about Helsing too. Maybe I'm just remembering certain moments in
Yeah,
Helsing, but
that's
I
right.
thought Trigun switched back and forth more. And it looks like in the first half of Trigun, there are very few serious moments. But I remember there
Yeah,
being more of
I
them because
haven't noticed very many serious moments.
I remember that contrast between the ultra silly and the ultra serious.
Mm-hmm. No, and even here's also the general tone of Trigun. Um, so far, I have not now like it's been really goofy. It's been very lighthearted. I have not gotten into it. Like we haven't gone. I want to wait until we've gotten a little further in its development. It's gotten come into itself a little bit more. But even in like the episode where the guy who used to be a like a gunsmith and he made these guns and then his guns were used to murder his family and like his village or something like that, and then he became an
Yeah.
alcoholic, and it's like that was still a goofy ass episode. Like
Yeah,
even though that was like that's fucking dark.
it
Like
was.
that
It was
poor
dark,
man
right?
I mean,
and his family.
I'm okay with goofy, lighthearted
Yeah.
tones when
Mm-hmm.
handling
Oh
serious,
yeah, no,
like more serious things.
absolutely,
Well,
absolutely.
I think
Um,
that actually helped that episode a lot. I think it really upped that level of sympathy for that character
mhm,
just because you were like, oh,
I
brutal.
mhm,
I wish they'd left more open to interpretation.
yeah,
It felt like they very much stated all the messages and everything in the episode to the audience, didn't leave the audience to think about anything on their own. And then
mhm,
at the end of it, they were like, I think I've been an alcoholic for years, but I'm just quitting it today and I will
mhm,
never drink again and I'm going back to being happy and wonderful and everything's resolved. And I was
yep.
like,
It's like what?
but
What?
really? Just
Can
like
he
that?
do that? Yeah, no. Yeah, at the end of the episode, it's like, oh, okay. I had this like afternoon that taught me a life lesson. Okay, I'm no longer an alcoholic, and all that like post traumatic stress from seeing my family murdered with my own weapons. Yeah, I'm over that.
That is very much an old style animated story. Not even animated. That is an old style storytelling thing, right? To
Yeah.
end an episode, to end a like short mini arc in a story with all the characters involved are now happy and everything's perfect because it got resolved and the good guys won.
Yep. Yep.
I think that's
Um,
less common in more modern storytelling.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, it's the thing, and so this is we very briefly touched on this. Yes, I think that's very true. We very briefly touched on this a number of times, but I want to kind of get into it. So. Helen often talked about like the nature of what the market is these days, with
Yeah.
respects to like Netflix, and you can binge watch things. It's all available, Amazon Prime. So something they used to do is they used to have these kind of more self-contained episodes. Like that's all of Star Trek. That is the X Files. The X Files, you're starting to get, larger arcs, in this time frame, like
Right.
the late '80s.
But you
I'm
had a
not saying
week
shows.
between or 2 weeks
Yeah.
between
Yeah.
episodes.
Okay.
It
So you had to have
Mhm.
things that were recapping
Yeah.
what happened. But you didn't want to tell everybody, oh well, this happened last week.
Mhm.
So it was kind of
Oh,
they
yeah.
were kind of doing that a lot, especially in more classical animes,
Yeah.
is that they kind of spell it out for you more.
Well, and
Whereas
also,
now, when you can binge watch, it's a totally different era.
yeah, and to be
yeah.
clear, it's not a thing where there were no shows with big complex arcs before. There
No,
absolutely were.
no, yeah.
Absolutely, there were shows that had big, complex narratives that you had to watch the whole thing, to get. There weren't. It wasn't week
Right.
for week. But the rule kind of was most shows were kind of week for week. But bad. Were you about to say something?
Probably.
That was like deer in headlights with the bright.
Well, what I was gonna say is not only just week for week, but
Yeah.
like you brought up Star Trek.
Mhm.
And like Star Trek had a huge overarching
Oh yeah.
theme
Well.
and had things
Mhm.
happening, especially in like the Next Gen or Voyager.
Yeah.
Whereas, they still had a lot of standalone episodes that
Mhm.
didn't necessarily need to be there, but they also helped to develop the character.
Can I
And
just
so,
Voyage
yeah, go for it.
Voyager best episode in the entire show is the time travel captain episode who's like, I'm going to save my wife using time travel that got her killed. And then he's flying
That's
his temporal ship around.
that
That
sounds
is
like a
the
Star
best
Trek.
episode.
Well, also, note for anybody: if I ever reference Star Trek, I'm talking about original series because I'm original
That
series.
that is a thing.
Not
I
original
I
like
I am
refer
TNG.
I
good
tend
stuff.
I tend to when I say Star Trek mean original series because I tend to refer to anything else by its
Yeah, that's
like
fair. That's
other
also one of the
thing.
reasons. Yeah, no, absolutely.
So
Like if I
so
talk about TNG, I'm going to
mhm.
say TNG probably.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Anyways,
Star
random
Star Trek.
asides aside. Yeah, no, that was that. Absolutely, the way that shows used to be made. A lot of the time, or the vast majority of the time, I'd say it was very week for week. It's very self-contained. I think it was at X Files that coined they ended up coining the phrase "Monster of the Week." I use that as a general thing. Monster of the Week is kind of a single, self-contained episode. It starts, and there's a conflict, and it goes. And at the end, everything's wrapped up, and all the characters, recurring or not, can move on, and they can move on to the next week where something else happens that's completely unrelated. And you have shows that have background, like overarching plots. But a lot of the time, when you more a lot of modern shows, because of the nature of the way people watch shows these days, um, get really complicated. There aren't episodes that are self-contained. There's big spanning things. A lot of shows do that. And yeah, I think how we were talking about exactly just the nature of it, the nature of how shows get made these days.
Well, and like how technology's changed,
Mhm.
how art's changed, the
Yeah,
style, how voice acting has changed,
yeah,
just the evolution. And we're kind of in a time where we get to see this evolution happening faster and faster, just like
oh yeah,
technology, which is so interesting to me.
yeah,
I just love seeing that because it's just such a interesting parallels.
yeah. Well, now this is always something that I think is really interesting. That this idea that storytelling is this big thing that people occasionally in history will do, and you'll have storytellers in 1800s. You'll have Charles Dickens and Alexander Dumas, and then you'll have whatever Arthur C. Clarke, and all these different people, and they just like do storytelling, and storytelling is this one big monolithic thing that doesn't really change. It's just but that's not true. Storytelling has been evolving ever since people started telling stories, which was probably the very beginning of humans existing. Is probably the very first form of art is people telling stories. I think, anyways. I have a lot of opinions about storytelling, but as it happens, storytelling evolves. You get Alexander Dumas, then you have Charles Dickens, and you have all the way up to uh, Gene Roddenberry, and different forms of media. Do you think
What
ink
about
pens?
Shakespeare or Noel Coward or
You know, um, and just thinking of things like the printing press and how that changed how people could interact with stories. Because before, you have so few things. A lot of things were dictated to people. Um,
I will also say Shakespeare era like
mm-hmm.
storytelling tricks and like propaganda and stuff on
Great.
point. That stuff's good. That stuff's fun.
Yeah, and that's also one of those things when you like Shakespeare. Everybody knows Shakespeare is a good writer. That's just like It's just like
That's not true. Some people can't stand him.
That's very true. That's very true.
I love Shakespeare, but
I feel like that's the Edgar Allan Poe thing, right?
Yeah.
Enough people love Edgar Allan Poe that a lot of people
They
hate
him.
Edgar Allan Poe.
Well, so I think Shakespeare is really interesting because here we are, an anime story podcast talking about Shakespeare. But Shakespeare is really interesting. There's an anime about Shakespeare, I think.
Yeah.
So Shakespeare is really interesting. If when you get
Magnus
into
about how
storytelling, and you look at what was happening at the time, and you look at the types of like where kind of storytelling and writing was, and then you read Shakespeare, and you're like, it's crazy to look at how far ahead of his time he was, and like how like again people think people say Shakespeare's a really good writer. Obviously, everybody knows that, but he's not bad. He's pretty good.
Some of the stuff Shakespeare did was really like brilliant and very clever.
No, yeah.
Like if you
But he actually didn't write down very much. This was actually written down from a third party who heard the stories delivered.
One of my biggest pet peeves of all time is people who think that everything Shakespeare wrote was amazing. It's like no, I like hell no. Like, did you see what is it? His first thing, Pericles or whatever. Like that was awful. God, what was the name of it? I can't even remember just now. But yeah, that was horrible. I hated it. It was
Shakespeare's fun. If you take a history class, Shakespeare like
You take any class, like
mm-hmm.
or like just so to me, and the reason I love anime and the reason I love voicing so much is because you get a chance to really dive into the work. And with the actors nowadays is they're really putting their heart and soul behind what they're saying. So they're not just saying the words. And I don't feel like they're necessarily just saying the words in classical anime either. Some of the older, less established voice actors, they aren't able to necessarily hit the specific directive that they're trying to. And you can hear that. You can feel it when it falls short. Like it's just that's what acting is. It's not about acting, it's about believing and being in the moment and being very specific with what you're trying to do to the other person. And so that's why like anime is so interesting to me because we don't get to see the actors. We just get to hear them. And I think that's so imperative and important, not only in dub, but also in sub. Like, I listen to the Japanese voice actors, and it's so interesting to me to hear when they're on point versus when they're not. So,
yeah.
I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
No, yeah,
Mm-hmm.
no, absolutely.
We're also very much in a great era because there is so much more potential for rapid development in storytelling, in the way stories are conveyed, just because of the medium, right? People being able to be like, cool, we're Netflix, we're gonna release a dozen new seasons
Right.
of shows all at once,
Yeah.
and people are gonna have opinions, and immediately the opinions are gonna reach the people who made the shows, and
Well,
we're gonna
no, and something that is incredibly important for that too is just the dissemination of information about storytelling.
Yes.
Like you can go
Yes.
online and type in how do I write a book?
how
do I
many
make a movie? How do I do and you're gonna have hundreds of different people telling you about all the things. You can watch
how many
documentaries.
times do you think Shakespeare was told by a like someone who saw his work how good his work was?
That's an
You
interesting
could
question.
you could probably like take all the time Shakespeare was told that in his life and have like one modern director spend a day on the internet and get told as many
Oh
times.
my God! Seriously? No, not even a day. 20
Which is
minutes.
yeah, which is part of the reason why that Shakespeare
Also, you
was
can
so
get
impressive
people
was
telling them that they should go kill themselves because they suck. So,
I wonder if Shakespeare had talked to more people, he would have gotten more of that. Who knows?
but anyway, yeah. So I think it's fascinating to look at to look at and so relating this back to Trigun, as was the I think objective, was that Trigun kind of a different style, has a different style of writing, has a different style of voice acting, different style of dialogue for sure, and that's not necessarily bad. in the same way that like I'm not gonna judge, an old like I'm not gonna judge Star Trek off of the modern convention for actors, you know, because like there was like
Are you gonna do the imitation again
which imitation?
of William Shatner?
Oh no,
Oh,
Hugh
there's
Shatner.
something on the wing of the plane. No,
Exactly.
damn it, I got the line wrong.
There's something on the wing.
There's something on the wing of the plane.
That's great. It's classic. Killed it way back.
Of
Killed it.
course, I have to quote something that's not Star Trek, but
Exactly. Yes. It was the Outer Limits. Was that? Was that the Twilight Zone?
I think it's the Twilight Zone.
Dun, 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 dun.
Na-na-na-na-na.
But yeah. So
Mhm.
no, I think anime is in a really interesting place, and I think it's in an interesting place because of just how available it is. Like, because this is a problem I know,
Yes.
Helen, you've run into, is getting anime, like in the 90s, early
Oh
2000s.
yeah.
Like,
Oh yeah.
you couldn't get anime. Where do you get anime? Like, is it
You had
video
to go
store?
to Best
Can
Buy
you find
or
somebody online to mail you a
yeah, I
VHS?
mean, you could.
Yeah.
It was hard. It was really there's one that I cannot remember for the life of me the name of,
Mhm.
but the old name was called Gundam Wing,
Oh
and it
yeah.
was one of my favorites growing up. And it's not actually called that at all. And
Oh
they
yeah.
changed the name completely. And so now you can't really find it unless you know the name
Interesting.
or know how to look for it. And so I think that's really interesting because it's kind of like a parallel to not being able to get the information back then is we got disinformation in some ways.
Oh yeah, no, absolutely. I think that was a relatively
To be fair, we get a lot of disinformation
Well,
nowadays
yeah, that's
too.
fair.
that's true too.
Side,
We
it
got a
just
lot of muddy information now.
they're very true. But I think that was a big thing. Yeah, just being able to find shows. Most people probably saw the majority of their anime on like Toonami,
Yeah, I watched
or
a lot
Toonami.
of
Adult Swim
Tsunami.
or something like that.
Yep.
Because I mean that's
Or
where they have.
G4. I watched G4 a lot.
Oh yeah, G4. Yeah.
Mhm.
Oh poor G. Where did G4 go? It's gone now, isn't it?
It's not G4 it's like a talk show esque thing now.
Oh,
I
that's
don't
fair.
really
That's fair. That's unfortunate. Back when I watched it.
right. What's that?
But yeah, no, most people it happened like anime was hard to collect for a long time. So people didn't, or people tried. People used to be really proud of their anime collections because it was hard to get. These days, like
My dad encouraged me.
oh yeah, nice, awesome,
Yeah, my dad was like, "Anime's awesome."
yes, believers. So today though, it's amazing because like literally, I mean, this is where we have an internet show about different anime and we watch a different anime every week and we can actually do that and it's not prohibitively expensive. Like that's great.
And
Most
finding
like
it,
Netflix.
you can find it on some median
Oh yeah,
usually.
between Netflix and Amazon
Um,
and Hulu and like
yeah,
shitty
exactly.
anime websites.
Crunchyroll. I like
Crunchyroll.
Crunchyroll.
Crunchyroll, yeah.
Crunchy.
There's a ton of sources out there to get anime, and so you can pretty much you can find whatever you want to watch, and that's awesome. So with that in mind, you can also binge entire shows, and so because people are binging entire shows, you're taking in this media in a different way.
You know what's cool about Crunchyroll though? Is that new, like brand new anime, you cannot binge watch. You have to watch it every week. So we have like 10 animes that we watch every like
really?
Wednesday.
Because they simulcast it.
Yeah,
Oh, that's
it's
cool.
awesome.
That is pretty good.
Oh.
So, so because of the changing way because like that, because and you can watch an anime, just a TV show in general, all at once.
Or you wait till it all comes out and
wait till
you
it
can
all
watch
comes
the whole
out,
thing.
watch it all at once.
Yeah.
Because of that, a lot of the time people are
It-
watching shows in those different ways instead of every week, watching one.
So it used to be that you had to watch every week. Now it is that if you're watching every week, you're making the choice to do so. And for me,
Yeah.
it takes me really being compelled to watch an anime when the episodes air. To
Yeah.
be like, I'm gonna find a simulcast. I'm gonna watch it as it comes out. I've done that with a few anime, but
Uh,
most I don't do it with.
I've been doing it with Zombieland Saga. I've been doing it with the slime one that's really good. I can't remember the name of that one.
Right.
And then the Jin Goblin
Goblin
Slayer.
Dungeon anime.
Goblin Slayer.
Goblin Dungeon Anime Slayer.
No, it's Goblin Slayer. And it's really good. Like there's oh, that one gets me though. There's 45 seconds of nothing happening at the end of the last episode where you get a bird's eye view of what's going on. Like literally it's a bird eye. And you see in the reflection what's happening, but nothing happens. Nothing in the
Is it
scene
just a
happens for
really
45
long-
seconds.
It's a really long shot that nothing happens during.
Yes.
Classic
We're
anime.
sitting there and going, no, why? Just cut it short. Like, I don't understand.
That is one of those things.
That one killed me.
Yep.
Sorry.
No, yeah, no, absolutely.
Side note, that bothered me.
But no, yeah. So what I was going to get to is this is one of the way that just writing an anime and shows is evolving because people know that people aren't like writers know that people aren't watching once a week or once a month or whenever every single time. They're waiting till a show comes out or waiting a few weeks, watching 4 or 5 episodes in a row.
Mm-hmm.
Getting that, and then waiting a few more weeks or waiting until the season's over and then going through the whole season because you can remember everything. There's never a moment where you're like, wait, who was that character again? Oh, wait, what was that? Were they mad? It's just easier. And binge watching is a thing humans tend to be really good at. It seems. So writers know that. So they know
that's kind of sad in a way, though.
Well, it's like we're good at sitting on our butts and staring at stuff.
That's what I mean. That's the sad part.
Yeah. I think that's great. It's like lions. That's all lions do all day.
Too much blue light. We need to have those glasses. The orange light.
Exactly. But this is
I
also
can do orange light. Orange.
People are a lot less forgiving of shows that, or I don't even know if I want to say less forgiving because it's kind of harder to tolerate. Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
When a show is just like self-contained episodes and there's no big ongoing plot, people they're not into that. Because they're watching the show all at once. Unless it's a really compelling show or really compelling characters for some reason, you kind of need a bigger plot, a bigger story to drag things on or to kind of link things together. Because like binge watching the X-Files or Friends. Even Friends has a number of kind of ongoing longer narratives. Now they're not things that are. Obviously there's Ross and Rachel's relationship. That is the thing that goes on.
Overarching narratives.
Yeah, it's an overarching narrative. But that's really important. That keeps it compelling because every time Ross has a bad relationship episode, or that Rachel or Ross or Rachel has a bad relationship episode, it's like, oh well, they're like there's conflict there, and Ross and Rachel really want to be with each other, even though they hate each other, kind of. Or really, Rachel hates Ross, but not really. Ross.
Their obstacles are playing against each other.
Oh yeah, no, it's great.
And so it builds tension. It builds higher stakes.
And that there's a thing there.
Yes.
There's Joey and Chandler's random stuff. Like, there's a larger narrative there that's going to keep you involved. Even though, for the most part, every episode is kind of like it's the one where they get the chick and the duck, or the one that
who gets what they want. Like whoever do they get what they want? Do they not? And how they go about doing that. As humans, we find that very interesting.
Yeah.
And so seeing that grow.
Yeah, and you get those, you get episodes that are kind of about one thing. It's about Joey and Chandler get the chick and the duck, or Joey has a plague. But there are other narratives in there that drag it along, and yeah, they everything in there, the characters all have some kind of motivation in there. They conflict with each other, but. And that's the thing that happens in anime too. Like, if we talk about, we won't talk too much about Cowboy Bebop, but Cowboy Bebop, every episode, that I recall just now, I have to rewatch it, which we're gonna do sometime. But Cowboy Bebop, every episode kind of has its own thing going on, but there is an underlying narrative of what's this thing with Spike and. Are they? Well, there's always the are they gonna get food?
They're super
episode?
objective for the entire series.
Exactly, and each individual episode has its own set of conflicts.
Objective, yes.
Yeah, so it's you can do the individual episode thing, but it kind of has to be tied together these days, or people really lose interest.
Agreed.
Somebody's food is done.
Not me.
Sorry.
Excuse me.
I noticed I can change my lighting. Behold.
Yeah. You have wonder. Oh.
You have to have another still image for each
So
color.
anime is great. We watch lots of anime.
Yeah.
We're continuing Trigun next week.
That's
Yes.
true. We are continuing Trigun next week. Are we gonna
Although
cut it
I
out?
will be on a boat.
Yes,
So
true.
Helen will be watching Trigun on a boat. That may skew her perspective of the show slightly.
Because being on a boat does that. Are we gonna cut it at the normal time?
Yes.
Yeah, we'll cut it at the normal time. Sounds good. So 15.
Because that'll be it'll be 7 my time.
Aha. Yes, you're in some other place that's not near us.
I know.
Weird.
I'm so excited. It's gonna be warm, but not too warm.
It's not gonna be warm over here.
It's gonna be sandy.
But not too sandy.
Oh, I'm super jealous.
I'm ecstatic.
Yeah, so next week we will be having a big overall discussion of Trigun. We will lay the cards down, pass judgment.
Ultimately conclude that you should watch it in the background.
That might happen. Maybe. Don't jump the gun.
Got me.
Bad. But I'm excited to see it. I'm excited to get more into a lot of the different elements. We'll see. We'll see what happens. That's gonna be. Let me see. That's gonna be. Oh my gosh, that's already gonna be December, isn't it?
It's not a bad thing. A lot of good anime or background anime.
That's true. Uh-oh. Hang on. A thing happened.
A thing.
There we go. We're good. We're good. I got it. Yes, that's gonna be Saturday, the 1st of December of the Christmas season. I'm gonna be working a lot that month. So we'll see. It's the busy season. Everywhere it's the busy season.
Not for me.
Oh. If you're a teacher, then that's the hurry up and get stuff done, and then it's not the busy season. As far as I'm aware.
Yeah.
Summer's the really slow season. Yep. So next week we're going to be going through all of Trigun. We today talked about kind of some Trigun stuff.
What do you guys hope for going forward with Trigun? What do you want out of it, and do you have any expectations?
I do. I would have to say, my husband and a lot of people around me really love Trigun. And so it was a classic among our friends growing up in high school and college. And so for me, my expectation is that there is an overarch, there is something more going on that I'm just not grasping it, and that I'm going to see and hear and feel that. So I'm waiting. I'm reserving.
Yes, no, I agree. So I think for me, what I really want to see is I really want to see the characters' backstory come into focus. I want to see what they want. I'd love to see what the main character. I'm going to call him the main character because I can't remember his title. The blasting of something or other.
Fash
the blaster.
Stampede.
The Stampede.
That was it. Vash the Stampede. I want to see what his shtick is, and I want to see what he wants, because it kind of feels like he doesn't want anything. So
That's fair.
I'd love to I want to know what he's all about. So I'd love to see his motivation. I'd love to see how that kind of intertwines with the two insurance adjusters.
Yeah.
Stuff.
I
Like-
would love if they got some development.
Yeah. No, absolutely, because they seem to be key characters in the show.
They're key characters, but
I want to
they-
see what he wants and what they want and how that fits together.
my biggest concern is that those two characters are going to just be following Vash, that they're not going to get development. I want
Well,
to
I
see
hope that
them
doesn't
get
happen.
proper development because I know there's an overarching story with Vash the Stampede. I know we're going to get backstory on him and we're going to get some development. And by episode 13, we've already seen a little bit of development at the end of that section of the show.
I also like
but-
his name, because I don't want to call him Vash the Stampede. That's a lot of words.
You can just say Vash.
We actually have a friend that looked like Vash the Stampede, and so we always called him Vash in high school.
That is awesome. That is awesome.
So we did call him Vash for short.
It is funny that happens sometimes where there are characters in stories that get referred to by their full name every single time, and it's like, why? Why?
You ever
It's
heard of a
Vash.
Nickname? Jeez. So yeah, that's what
David
that's what
Gardner.
David Gardner. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Points if you understand that reference. Nerd points. Super old school. But yes, I think hopefully we will get all that stuff in the next Saturday's episode. All right, well, it's time to end the podcast. So thanks for joining us, everybody. Thanks for being here. Thanks for bearing with us on the technical difficulties. We'll see you next Saturday, the December the 1st.
Keep
Bye, guys.
watching. Keep watching anime.
Yay!